Thank you so much for joining us here tonight to talk about the City of Mountain View's Housing Element Project and to get an update on where we are in the process and to have great discussion. My name is Dave Javid with Plan to Place. I'm part of the consultant team led by BAE, and you'll meet a few members of the consultant team here tonight. And I'm helping with the engagement portion and will be the MC tonight to make sure that all things go smoothly. And as we typically do with these meetings, we do have live interpretation available here tonight in Mandarin. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to ask Aileen to read this slide, and then we're going to go ahead and open that room up. Aileen, over to you.
本次会议提供中文普通话的口译服务。如果您需要听中文，请点击屏幕下方工具栏上的语言选项，选择中文，然后您就可以听到中文的讲解。谢谢。
Excellent. Thank you, Aileen. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open that channel and make sure that Aileen could get in there. And that's under the Chinese option for anyone else that'd like to follow along. Excellent. It looks like we're in and the recording is started. Hopefully, Rachel, let us know if there's an issue there. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand this over to Ellen to do a welcome.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Ellen Yao. I am a senior planner with the City of Mountain View and the project planner for the Housing Element Update Project. So as you can see, we have a pretty big team tonight, and we're really excited to have you here and to get input from the community. So from the Mountain View side, I'm here with Eileen, our Mandarin Community Outreach Specialist, Martin Alkire, Eric Anderson, Krisha Pinalar, Brittany Whitehill, and Sarush Abutalabi. And then we also have our consultant team from BAE and ESA. We have Stephanie and Evan. And from Plan to Place, you've met Dave, Paul, and Rachel is also here joining us.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellen. So before we get started, just a couple of logistical items. I'm sure you are all Zoom experts at this point, but just as a reminder, the way that we are going to actually have the conversation here with you all tonight is mainly going to be through the small groups. And once we get there, the mics will be muted just so there isn't accidental interruptions, but there will be a chance to contribute, and we'd love to hear from you all. And to do that, you'll use the hand raise function that you can access through the reactions window on most computers. And that'll bring up an option to choose the raise hand and or through your participant window. So you'll have an opportunity to use that then. We also do have the chat available, and you'll see that that is available right now if you did have any questions or comments, but we're hoping to hold all those questions and comments to have a robust discussion with you in the small groups, but we will be fielding those as well and might have a chance to kind of answer some questions before we move into small groups towards the end of the presentation. So if we want to go to the next slide. So in terms of agenda, we've gotten through the welcome introductions. You're going to have a presentation, a short presentation, just to give you a sense of the background of what a housing element is, where we are in the process, what the community engagement process looks like, and how important it really is for you all to be involved. And then most importantly, we've left the majority of the meeting to have small group discussions with you all, and we'll move into those small groups. There is also going to be a couple polls, one that'll come up here soon, a demographic poll, just to kind of gauge and understand who's in the room with us. There will be another poll before we move into the small groups that will be topical, just to kind of understand what your priorities might be to help spur the discussion in the small groups. And then after we go through that discussion, we're going to come back and do a report out just so we get a sense of the conversations that were had in each one of those groups so that you all get a breadth of the information. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and close hopefully right around 8 o'clock as planned. So with that, we are going to launch into our first poll. And this demographics poll, which you'll hopefully see come up here on your screen. This is really, again, we're going to ask these questions as we go throughout the process and every engagement opportunity to understand who we're speaking to and to make sure that as we go through the process, we're reaching everyone. And if we're not, course correct appropriately to connect with all different subgroups within Mountain View. So these questions are fairly standard that you would probably see in any meeting format or on the census, just to get a quick snapshot of who's in the room with us. And it looks like you all are jumping in there, which is fantastic. I'm going to give this maybe another minute or so. Looks like about a third of you have taken it so far. And then we'll quickly flash the results on the screen. So just as a frame of reference, the questions are about age, race, and ethnicity, understanding who currently owns or rents or other in the city, what type of housing folks live in, income levels, and describing generally why you decided to join us here tonight. So with that, I think most people have had a chance to contribute. And again, if you don't get a chance to contribute, no problem at all. This is just to kind of get a quick gauge of who's with us. Looks like a couple more people are trying to get in, so I'm going to wait just maybe 5 more seconds here. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. Oh, couple last takers. Okay, here we go. So ending it now, I'm going to share the results out, and hopefully you all can see that now. I'm not going to go through all these results in great detail and let you go ahead and scroll through it on your own, but it looks like we have a pretty good cross-section in terms of age and ethnicity, which is great. Almost an even mix of renters and owners. Most people living in homes or duplexes, or actually a good amount in apartments. And then it looks like most of you, as expected, live in Mountain View and are obviously here to find out more about this process. So that's great. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing that now. So thank you so much for taking the time to take that poll. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to get us started.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Stephanie Hager. I'm an associate principal at BAE Urban Economics. We're the lead consultant working on the City of Mountain View's housing element. I'm just going to give a little bit of background on what a housing element is and a little bit of background demographic data to help set the stage for the breakout room discussions that we'll be having in a few minutes. The housing element is the city's plan to meet housing needs over the next 8-year period. So this means addressing housing needs for you, for your neighbors, other members of your community, as well as providing access to opportunity, both for people who currently live in Mountain View and for people who may not live in Mountain View now, but may want to live in Mountain View. The housing element is one element of the city's general plan, which is where the housing element term comes from. It's a requirement for every city and county in California. It must be updated every 8 years and approved by the California State Department of Housing and Community Development. So it needs to meet a certain set of criteria in order to get that approval from the state. These are all updated throughout the state on sort of a staggered schedule. So all of the Bay Area jurisdictions have their housing elements covering the period between 2023 and 2031. And that's the period that we are planning for the city of Mountain View. There are some required components that go into a housing element. One is a housing needs assessment. In this portion of the housing element, we are looking at demographic and housing trends. We do this partly by looking at data. We have a variety of different sources that we use for that, but that's also part of what we're hoping to get at tonight by talking to all of you. So we often find that the community has input on where there are housing needs that the data may not capture, and so we're interested in hearing from you what you're seeing in terms of housing needs in your community. There's also a portion of the housing element that evaluates the prior housing element to figure out what types of things should be carried forward and what should be revised or updated for the current 8-year cycle. There's a housing sites inventory component, which I'll talk about in more detail in a couple of slides, but this looks at where new housing could be built in Mountain View. There's a constraints analysis that looks at barriers to addressing housing needs in Mountain View, particularly producing new units across the affordability spectrum. And there's a goals, policies, and programs section, which is where we lay the groundwork for how the city will address various types of housing needs throughout the next 8-year period. This is also something that we're hoping to get feedback from you all on tonight in order to help us shape this plan and think about ways that we can fill gaps in housing needs and address the types of policies and programs that you'd like to see the city thinking about over the next 8 years. At a sort of high level, there are various objectives that the housing element is meant to achieve. One is housing production. This component looks at accommodating the number of units that are projected in the city for over the housing element period. This is determined by the RHNA allocation, which we'll have some slides on in a minute, what I mean by that phrase, but it's the projected need for housing in the city over the planning period. We also look at housing preservation. So ways to protect and rehabilitate housing in the community, particularly for affordable housing. We also look at affirmatively furthering fair housing, so ways to help create a inclusive community that provides equal access to opportunity. And by access to opportunity, we're thinking about things like jobs, transit, other amenities that people need, as well as affordable and quality housing. We also want to think about this in terms of providing housing for all. And what I mean by that is across the spectrum of income levels, and also for special needs populations. And I'll tell you in a minute what we mean by special needs populations also. So the regional housing needs allocation is a fairly significant component of the housing element. We shorten this to RHNA, so that's the term that we often use when we're talking about the regional housing needs allocation. So what is that? So the RHNA is the number of housing units that Mountain View will need to plan for over the next 8 years. This starts out as a projected statewide need for housing, which is then allocated down to each region in the state. So in our case, the Bay Area, and then to the city and the county, to each city and county in each region. In the Bay Area, this is guided by Plan Bay Area, which is the plan to guide development in the region through 2050. And one of the major goals of that plan is to direct housing to areas where there's things like jobs and transit. And so that helps to guide where these RHNA allocations are allocated by city and county in order to help achieve some of those goals. The housing element is required to show the city's ability to meet that RHNA allocation. That's done primarily by identifying sites where new housing can be built and removing barriers to housing development. The city is not actually required to build those units, but rather is required to put all of the pieces into place that are necessary to make sure that those units can be built. On this slide, we're showing the total RHNA allocation for the Bay Area for the 2023 to 2031 period, as well as the prior 8-year period. So you'll see here for the upcoming 8-year period, we have a total region-wide throughout the Bay Area allocation of 441,000 units. This is a significant increase from the last 8-year period where that number was 188,000. This is due to changes in state law that have resulted in a difference in the way that the state projects housing need throughout the state and within each region that have led to significantly higher RHNA allocations throughout the state. You'll also see here that there are allocations for various income levels. This means that throughout the region, all cities and counties are needing to plan for very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income housing. So really looking at ways to address housing needs that spans the full income spectrum. In Mountain View, the RHNA allocation for the 2023 to 2031 period is 11,135 units. So this is the number of units that the city will need to plan for as part of this housing element that we're working on now. Like the rest of the region, you'll see that this is a significant increase from the last 8-year period where the city needed to plan for just under 3,000 units. And again, you'll see that this need is divided up between various income levels in order to address needs across the income spectrum. So When we talk about households at each of these different income levels, I just wanted to provide a little snapshot of what this could mean. There are a number of different permutations that households can take at every income level. So this is by no means exhaustive of what all households can look like at each of these income levels. It's just sort of a sample of some potential households. So we have a moderate income household with 4 people. They have an annual income of $178,000 per year. That puts them into the moderate income category. This could be a household where, say, one income earner is an elementary school teacher and the other is a legal assistant. We have a 5-person household with an annual income of $123,000 per year. This would make this household a low-income household. This would be could be a household where you have, say, a real estate agent and a butcher. There's, of course, a bunch of other occupations that could fall within this, but this is the example that we're giving here. We have a very low-income household with 3 people and an annual income of about $75,000 per year. This would be a single-income earner who is a crane operator in our example here. And then we have an extremely low-income household. In our example, there's a single-income earner in this household with an annual income of about $40,000 per year, which is about what you might make as a nursing assistant. So how will Mountain View address its RHNA requirements? The primary requirement under state law is for the city to identify sites where new housing can be built. The sites that are identified for this purpose they must meet certain criteria that are set by the state. This means that they need to be zoned for residential use, have access to the appropriate utilities for residential development, and be reasonably likely to be developed within the planning period. For sites that are identified specifically to meet the low income need that we were just talking about on the RHNA slide a couple slides ago, those must be zoned to accommodate development of at least 30 dwelling units per acre. So there's also some additional analysis that we need to consider as a part of the site's analysis, besides just looking at those base requirements. So for certain types of sites, which include non-vacant sites, sites that have existing development that would need to be redeveloped to accommodate housing, and also for particularly small sites or particularly large sites, we need to do some additional analysis to make sure that it's reasonably likely that housing could actually be built on those sites. We also need to consider the fair housing implications of where we're identifying sites in Mountain View. In general, this means avoiding clustering affordable units within, say, 1 or 2 specific areas of the city and making sure that the affordable units are sort of spread throughout, and also providing equal access to high opportunity areas. And by that, we mean areas where there are access to things like jobs and transit, where there are not, significantly higher levels of pollution or other environmental constraints. And so making sure that, particularly for low-income sites, we're providing access to high opportunity areas. If the sites that are already zoned in the city do not provide enough capacity to meet the city's full RHNA, there is a requirement that the city rezone in order to create enough residential sites to meet that requirement. In Mountain View specifically, we don't anticipate that being a problem. We think that the city has enough sites now that are already zoned and meet the state requirements to accommodate the RHNA of that 11,000 units that we were talking about. And if that is the case, the city is not required to rezone as a part of the housing element process, and there would be no changes in land use that would be necessary in order to meet the state requirements for the housing element. We are still in the process of doing the analysis of the sites, and so this could change as we move through the process, but right now this is what we think is the case. The city has sort of gotten us to this point through the groundwork that they've laid over the past several years, and also currently undergoing to create some of that residential capacity. So this includes the precise plans that the city has adopted in recent years, the R3 zoning update, which is currently in process. And we also think that even outside of these areas, there are other sites throughout the city that could potentially accommodate new housing development over the next 8 years. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some demographic background data for Mountain View. The city currently has a population of about 82,000. That's an increase of 11% since 2010. It's a slightly higher rate of growth than the county overall. You have a large renter population. 58% of all of your households are renters. That's compared to 44% in Santa Clara County. Your median annual household income is about $148,000. Again, that's a little bit higher than the county. And you have a large proportion of one-person households, which comprise about 30% of all households in the city. In the county, it's more like 20%. The Mountain View is slightly less diverse in terms of race and ethnicity than Santa Clara County and the Bay Area. This slide shows that 44% of your population is white and not of Hispanic or Latino origin. That's compared to 32% in the county and 39% in the Bay Area overall. And there's a correspondingly smaller share of households that, of the population that identifies with other races and ethnicities. There is a component of the housing element where we'll be diving a little bit deeper into this data to look at some of the factors that may be at play here that are influencing the demographics in Mountain View in this way. I mentioned special needs households a few slides ago. This is a term that's defined by the state and it includes seniors, large families, single parent households, farm workers, people who are experiencing homelessness, and people with disabilities. In Mountain View, you have about 5,700 residents who have one or more disabilities. About 11% of your population is age 65 or older, and a good portion of those, 41%, have a high housing cost burden, meaning that they spend a lot of their income in order to afford their housing costs. There are about 606 homeless individuals living in Mountain View. This is as of the 2019 point in time count, which is the most recent that we have available right now. And at that point in time, that was an increase of 416 from 2 years prior to that. So this would not reflect some of the more recent efforts like the Project Home Key project that some of you may be familiar with in Mountain View that have occurred since the 2019 point in time count. So I want to talk a little bit about housing cost burden. This is a measure that's often used to assess the affordability of housing in a given area. And typically what we look at is how many households are spending more than 30% of their household income on housing. This is the threshold at which we find that, particularly for lower income households, you see households that are really potentially struggling to pay for their housing costs as well as meeting their other basic needs, like paying for food and healthcare. So in Mountain View, you have about a third of your households that have a high housing cost burden, meaning that they are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. About 16% have a severe housing cost burden, which means that they pay more than 50% of their income on housing. For renters, that proportion is a little bit higher. About 37% of your renter population has a high housing cost burden and 19% has a severe housing cost burden. For lower income households, that share is significantly higher. Among that population, you see that 73% of households have a high housing cost burden. So Mountain View has seen significant increases in rent over the past 10 years or so, similar to Santa Clara County and the Bay Area. This chart shows median contract rent between 2009 and 2019. The blue line on top is Mountain View. So as you can see, it's gone up quite a bit in that time period and is also significantly higher, or at least consistently higher than Santa Clara County and the Bay Area throughout that entire period. And we see sort of a similar trend when we look at home prices. This chart shows 2001 through 2020, the Zillow Home Price Index. The sort of blue-green line at the top again is Mountain View. And you'll see that throughout this period, Mountain View has consistently had higher home prices than both Santa Clara County and the Bay Area. In all three geographies, home prices have really increased quite a bit. In the 2001 time period, we're seeing these prices are somewhere in the high 400,000s, low 500,000s, and now in all three geographies they're over $1 million. And in Mountain View in particular, they've really increased quite a bit with the price of $1.8 million. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dave to talk about our breakout room discussions. Thanks so much for being here tonight, and I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. Right on time, perfectly done. So as we mentioned earlier, the main reason we're here tonight is to hear from you all. So we wanted to provide plenty of time for that to happen. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is, along with the discussions in the breakout rooms, we also do have what we're calling a community input form, an online format to also provide input that way. We're hoping that you all stick around with us in the small group discussion and then share that link with your friends and neighbors to get more input. But basically what's going to happen here next is we're going to split up evenly into 3 groups. And you're going to see yourself manually get moved, and or if you don't, something will pop up and move you into a room. Once you're there, you're going to have a facilitated discussion, and your facilitators, the first thing they're going to do is just mute mics just to make sure that we don't have any potential distractions. But once you do want to contribute, again, using a hand raise feature, will allow you to contribute. We highly recommend that you all have your videos on so we can see each other. You can even use your own hand and raise your hand physically if you'd like to speak, and we can unmute you that way. But we're really hoping to hear from everyone. And as part of that discussion, we have a few topics that we'd like to discuss based on the great information you just heard from Stephanie, what some of those critical housing issues might be. What do you think that Mountain View should do to address the housing need and goals? What are some of the characteristics in housing that you see over the next 10 years? And what suggestions you might have for Mountain View to solicit additional feedback? Because we're always looking to extend the reach of the process to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to contribute. And then, as I mentioned before, after we have that discussion, we're going to come back and do a quick report out just to understand what the conversations were in each room, and then send you all on your way. So before we launch into the small groups, if we can go to the next slide, I think that's our live poll. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, sorry, I forgot the feedback form that I mentioned earlier. So here are links to the feedback forms that I mentioned, and these are basically online multiple choice questions and an opportunity to provide additional comments or feedback that you'd like to be included as part of the summary of this engagement and of this workshop. So as you see here, these are short links to each one of those community input forms, as well as these cool QR codes that if you bring your phone up to with your camera, it'll take you directly to those forms. Again, we're just showing this not as a way to have you leave the meeting. We're really hoping you stick with us, but this is just another way to get feedback and something to share out with your friends and neighbors. And we'll remind you about this link as well within the small groups. So with that, I want to just launch one more live poll as a larger group here together. Again, just to understand generally what topics you think are critical, and that'll help us kind of think through the discussion as well in the small group. So I'm launching that now. And you should see that pop up in front of you. I'm going to read through the questions, but you all should be able to see them. The first question is, how satisfied are you with your current housing situation? From satisfied to dissatisfied. The second question is, how satisfied are you with the affordability of housing in Mountain View? Very similar to the discussion that we're hoping to have. Third is, how satisfied are you with the variety of housing types that are available in Mountain View? Again, kind of feeding into the affordability of housing and allowing everyone that would like to stay in Mountain View to stay in Mountain View. The fourth question is, how do you feel about the amount of new housing that has been built in Mountain View during the past few years? And then finally, how well do you think Mountain View provides access to housing and opportunity for all segments of the population, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, disability status, or other? So I read through those questions to hopefully stall long enough to give you all a chance to take this poll. Looks like we're about 3/4 of the way there. So I'm gonna give you all about another 30 seconds. And this is really important, I think, for us all to see as a larger group of where some of those priorities are before we kind of get in and dive deep into the discussion. And again, this will kind of help maybe spur the discussion as we move into those groups. And one thing I forgot to mention as you all are finishing this is you'll see when you get in the small groups, we have a virtual whiteboard that we use where we're going to be taking all the notes. And the chat will be available as well if you wanted to chat instead of giving verbal comments. And for those that are using their phones, if you dial *9, that'll bring up your hand raise function so that you can verbally contribute as well. So all those options are available to you, and I think I've stalled long enough, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and we could all see the results here in a second. Okay, so they're sharing back out all to you. So first question of how satisfied are you with the current housing situation? It looks like we have answers across the board. About a third of you are satisfied, and about another third are not so satisfied, and that's kind of why we're here tonight to speak through that. How satisfied are you with the affordability of housing? Most are dissatisfied. Again, a good conversation of why we're here tonight. And then on the variety of housing questions, again, it looks like about half of you aren't satisfied with a variety of housing types, and we'd love to hear from you as to what that means to you and what housing is needed. And then how do you feel about how much housing has been built over the past few years? And about half of you, again, or more than half, think that we could use more housing in Mountain View and maybe not enough has been built. And then lastly, how well do you think Mountain View provides access to housing for a variety of demographic types? And it looks that one as well, either neutral or you'd like to see more opportunity for all. So thank you so much again. That is really, really helpful. And again, on the feedback form, it looks like there was a question of whether there's an option to provide other comments. There is on that input form, but we're really here to hear from you live and in person. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the poll results. And now we're going to officially open up the rooms. I'm going to make one quick small adjustment. Looks like we might have lost a couple participants, which happens. So I'm going to add a few more participants to one of our other rooms just to even it out here. Okay, I think we're ready. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms. Again, you're going to be moved over there manually. Some of you are going to stay right here in this main room with us. And one note on that I wanted to mention is if there are any Mandarin speakers that are following along with us right now, and they're hopefully hearing me through Aileen, our interpreter, if you can use the hand raised to let us know that you would like to continue to follow along in Mandarin, that would be a huge help. So that hand raise feature in your reactions window will let us know. So that way I make sure that I keep you in this main room. And again, worst case scenario, if you get moved to another room and want to come back here so that you can follow along in Mandarin, you could just simply leave the room that I put you in. Okay, I don't see any hand raised. So here we go. I'm going to open the rooms. You all are going to go have a great time. And I'm going to come back here and do a quick report out and then send you on your way. So thanks all for sticking with us. And here we go. Have a good time. Looks like folks are trickling back in now. Thank you so much for sticking with us and the great conversations that was popping around all the rooms. And it sounded like we got a lot of fantastic input. So we really, really appreciate your time here tonight. So what we're going to do next is just do a very quick kind of round robin report out, just highlighting the very high level key themes that we heard in each one of the discussions. And then we'll bring the presentation back up so that you can get a reminder of where to go for more input and where to go to continue to track along with the project. So I'm going to ask the lead facilitators of each group to do the report out. And I might just go right down the line from the main room and start there. And Ellen, you were in a pretty good flow, so I'm going to start with you. And if you want to share your screen and bring up your virtual board, feel free, or we can just kind of share and move on. So we'll just keep it real quick snapshot of what was discussed.
Thanks, Dave. So we had a lot of discussion. I think we stayed pretty heavy on question 1 and 2, but we talked about reducing cost and about density and affordability, and that was kind of some of the major issues that we saw in the city. We did also talk about solutions and how we can address housing needs and goals. That kind of, you know, we talked about parking being an issue. You know, we talked about down payment assistance and making sure that we support smaller infill developers. And we jumped into how we envision housing over the next 10 years. And we talked about neighborhood characteristic, you know, ensuring that our corporate businesses are paying into funds to support our infrastructure, and then how we can make sure that our unhoused is being housed. And a couple of suggestions in making sure that we're talking to existing workers who may not be current residents of Mountain View. So that's pretty much what we had in room number 1. A lot more comments, you know, were captured on our board.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellen. And yeah, just as a reminder, all this great information is going to be put into a brief summary that will have a report out, so you all can get a good sense of all the great discussion that was had. So next we'll go down the line and go to Stephanie. Stephanie, you want to give a quick report out of your discussion?
Yeah, hi everybody. So we had a good discussion. We talked about sort of making the RHNA allocations be something that's realistic, and how to make those numbers that are actually achievable in Mountain View. We talked about a need for a variety of housing types, including ADUs and duplexes. We also talked about stacked flat condominiums and co-ops. There was some interest in sustainability, the need for more sustainability features in Mountain View, particularly in relation to older homes sort of having fewer sustainability features in some newer homes, and trying to sort of upgrade that over time as new housing is built. And some discussion about higher density. We also had some discussions about parking, potentially unbundling parking from residential units, although there was a little bit of a disagreement about whether or not that was the right path to go or not. And we talked about, you know, how can the city keep housing prices from skyrocketing and sort of keep them in check? What can the city do to incentivize developers to build in advantageous locations? We talked a lot about putting housing near where there are already jobs in order to create some housing that's sort of near where the jobs are, but also from a sustainability perspective. We talked about the need to think about how various city programs could be financed as a part of this. And again, we talked about a variety of housing types. And then in the how housing should look in the next 10 years, we did talk again about more sustainable housing, you know, paying attention to the aesthetics of housing, but also maybe thinking about how to build more housing, also a balance of community open spaces and green spaces, along with more housing. And in terms of getting additional feedback, there was sort of echoing the thought of, you know, people who don't live in Mountain View but might want to, that Ellen mentioned, of trying to figure out how to reach out to that population, trying to think about community building, outreach to renters. There was a suggestion to put an ad on Craigslist. I think we had some good suggestions here for us to consider. And so I think we had a really good discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. And last but not least, we're going to go to Evan to do a quick report out of your room.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And so not to, you know, reiterate, I think a lot of the same points were covered, you know, in our room number 2. Majority of our focus were on the first 2 questions. I think everybody had a lot of great input. It was focused on affordability was one of the main topics, but also the amount of housing provided and the varying types of housing. So whether it's townhouse, row house, accessory dwelling units, that was a major point of clarification for folks. Multi-generational housing and providing you know, senior housing as well as more workforce housing. And then, you know, some of the infrastructure considerations that went along with that, and providing for schools and parks, as Stephanie mentioned. So some of the solutions people talked about is by building more housing and using some of the more data-driven approaches to looking at the site's inventory and past kind of historical information to find those locations where housing might be developed. That was brought up. And increasing some of the density and looking at zoning considerations as well. We did also talk about some of the, the future outlook for the city and how to build more housing units, creating more of a village community along specific corridors. And then, ways to solicit more feedback. I think transparency was brought up and reaching out to folks who may not have access to resources as easily and providing translation services and making sure everyone's voice is heard. So yeah, I think we had a great discussion and I appreciate everyone's feedback. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you all again. That was fantastic. Really, really great discussion and feedback. So we are right on time and about to wrap up. I was just you nailed it. Way to go. Stephanie's bringing up the final slide just to remind you all of how to continue to stay involved in upcoming events. Stephanie, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up. Oh, I think you might be muted. Sorry.
I am. Thank you. Or I was. So yeah, we really appreciate you all being here tonight, and we hope that you continue to stay involved in this process and let everybody else know that they should also get involved in this process. You can go to the city's website. mvhousingelement.org is the website for the Housing Element Update. We also have the community input form that we shared the links to earlier. I can scroll back to the QR code for that in a moment if you'd like. And we are having a couple of upcoming events. We're going to the Environmental Planning Commission on October 20th for a study session on the housing element, and the City Council on November 16th. And we are also planning some additional outreach events for 2022. So those are not yet calendared or quite figured out exactly what those are going to be. But if you go to mvhousingelement.org, you can sign up for updates. And when we have future events, you'll get an email letting you know that these updates are coming. And
excellent.
So just scroll back to the QR code real quick in case any of you want to get onto that community feedback form. You can also go to the website.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Unless there are any other wrap-up thoughts by Ellen and team, I think we are going to close the meeting. All right. Thank you all again so much for joining us here tonight. We look forward to seeing you again in the future, and have a great rest of your evening. Take care. Bye-bye.